over the years it has been called Crisopoli, the Athens of Italy, a miniature Paris. Today it is simply known as Parma, and we will trace its evolution and history through its monuments, churches, palaces and paintings. You need a lot of imagination to see in today's Piazza Garibaldi the ancient Roman Forum, nucleus of the city since its foundation. But the principal function of the city square is still the same. It has been the hub of public activity for over 2,000 years. Parma is one of those cities founded by order of the consul Emilio Lepido, along the road which is still today known as the Via Emilia. These cities were planned as bulwarks against invasion by Celts and Gauls. Parma was built in 183 BC, using the traditional Roman grid system. The main streets being the Cardo Massimo, which can today be identified with Via Cavour, and Via Farini, and the Decumano Massimo, which corresponds with today's Via Emilia. The Roman Forum was situated at the point of intersection between these two streets. There are few relics from that period. The remains of the Roman bridge near today's marketplace bear witness to the fact that the river has changed its course. Some columns survive from the amphitheatre which was built in the area around today's Borgo La Latta. A stone tablet reminds us where the Roman theatre was situated more than 2,000 years ago. The remains of the Paleo-Christian mosaics found in front of the cathedral and then transferred to the crypt of the cathedral itself. At the time of the grave crisis which struck the Roman Empire, the city underwent a period of decline and decay in the 2nd century after Christ. Under the Byzantine government, Parma became the seat of the treasury and mint, and was called Crisopoli, City of Gold. With the coming of the year 1000, a new impetus was given to monumental building, changing the face of the city. The cathedral is a prime example of the Romanesque style. At the back of the cathedral, we can see a refined, decorative frieze of animals. This is the oldest part of the building. During the Middle Ages, church construction began with the apse and the transept. The arch of the tribune with its cycle of the months is also in the Romanesque style. The ecclesiastical year began on March the 25th, with the Annunciation, and this is why the first month to be illustrated is March, removing a thorn from his foot. This iconography of the months, which changes according to the work carried out during the course of the year, is a sign of the Church blessing man the labourer, man whose work is no longer seen as a curse, but as a symbol of liberty and social progress. Inside the cathedral we find a characteristic of Romanesque churches, the matrons' galleries. A steep spiral staircase leads into each one, high above the central nave. From here, women took part in religious celebrations, separated from the rest of the congregation. The capitals, too, belong to this period, with their rendering in marble sculpture of biblical scenes. Fantastic images, and aspects of medieval life. On the west side of the cathedral square, the bishop's palace can be seen. Bishops carried out both religious and civic functions, and for this reason, when it was first built, the palace was a fortress, surrounded by a moat, its outer walls topped by battlements, traces of which can be seen on the north side of the building. The tower which dominates the bishop's palace dates from 1175. Here, pilgrims on their way to the holy places of Rome received hospitality. It was also a prison. After the cathedral, work was begun on the baptistry. We owe the building project to one of the greatest sculptors of the Middle Ages, Benedetto Antelmi, who carved his name and the date of the building on the architrave over the main portal. This monument, entirely clad in elegant pink Verona marble, is adorned with some of the most beautiful and significant sculptures to be found in the medieval Western world. The recent restoration has brought to light the original polychrome decoration. In the architrave of the north door, sculptured in low relief, are episodes from the life of John the Baptist, to whom the building is dedicated. In the jambs of this door there are the genealogical trees of Christ and the Virgin Mary. The outside perimeter of the baptistry shows a series of sculpted images of ferocious monsters, symbolizing the dark forces of evil from which each individual can be freed through baptism. In the polychrome lunette, the angel warns Joseph about Herod's threat. Inside the baptistry, the same lunette shows the flight into Egypt. At the center of the building lies the huge marble font, 8-sided like the building itself. The number 8 symbolized the 8th day of the week, the day of Christ's resurrection, and thus the promise of eternal life to the newly baptized, emerging from the font in memory of the saint himself, who had baptized Christ in the waters of the River Jordan. Amongst the masterpieces of Benedetto Antelmi are the statues representing the months, now placed in the loggias of the baptistry. This is something quite remarkable insofar as the Church considers time as simply part of God's eternity, whereas Antelmi's months signal the passage of earthly time for mankind. The cupola was painted in the Byzantine style in the second half of the 13th century, and its content underlines the passage from the Old to the New Testament through the figure of John the Baptist. In the lower register there are scenes from the life of the saint: the Annunciation to Elizabeth, his birth, the first baptisms, Herod's banquet, Salome carrying a tray with the head of the prophet. Above the altar, the figure of Christ holding the book with Alpha and Omega, at his side the Virgin Mary and the major prophets. Finally, in the last circle, the apostles and the evangelists. Like a gigantic reliquary, the baptistry was not only a religious monument, it was a symbol of the political and economic power of the city itself. The pink Verona marble was brought here by means of the innumerable canals which crossed the Po River plain in those times. This unexpected view of the city can be seen in the inlay work in the wooden choir stalls of the Church of St. John the Evangelist. The lions are all that remain of the original medieval decoration of the cathedral. They formed the base of the pulpit of which the marble sculpture of the Deposition of Christ by Benedetto Antelmi was part. The Church of the Holy Cross, built on the Via Emilia at one of the gates into the city, was a meeting place for pilgrims following the Via Francigena to Rome. The Church of San Francesco del Prato, or St. Francis of the Field, built on the Pratum Regium, an area of open ground where markets and fairs were held, can be considered one of the few examples of Gothic architecture in the city. The bell tower, held to be a luxury by the friars who had espoused the Franciscan rule of poverty, was only added in the 16th century. On the facade, as well as the rose window, there is a terracotta frieze made up of crossed arches and shell shapes. These arches, following developments beyond the Alps, would in time become Gothic, as in the cathedral bell tower, built after the cathedral itself, where the arches terminate with small statues. At the summit of the bell tower, the mobile angel indicates the direction of the wind. The original 13th century angel is to be found inside the cathedral and has become one of the symbols of the city. The facade of the cathedral was completed with the tribune resting on the backs of two lions carved in marble. Within the cathedral, side chapels were built where the arches have evolved from the roundness of the Romanesque style to the ogival Gothic shape. The Valeri chapel was decorated by Bartolino de' Grossi in the first half of the 15th century. On the vaulted ceiling of this chapel are painted episodes illustrating the life of the Virgin Mary. The paintings express a sense of religion dominated by fear of divine justice and an awareness of the forces of evil, using episodes from the lives of the Apostle St. Andrew, St. Catherine, and St. Christopher. Glimpses of bourgeois residences and refined clothes are in contrast with the macabre images of torture, beheading, and crucifixion. In the crypt of the cathedral can be found the Rusconi Chapel, dedicated to St. John by Bishop Giovanni Rusconi, who can be seen painted on the right near the enthroned Virgin Mary. The Ravacaldi Chapel is also in the crypt. This was built by the wish of Canon Antonio Ravacaldi, and his coat of arms, which features a turnip, can be seen both on the flowered background and on the vault. The chapel was decorated with episodes from the life of the Virgin, the Annunciation, the Presentation in the Temple, the Marriage of Mary. With the construction in 1270 of the Palace of the Podestà, the main public square of Parma changed too. a porticoed walkway joined this building to the palace of the Captain of the People, which was destroyed in the 17th century when the clock tower over it collapsed. The first town hall, the Domus Civitas, shows traces of its medieval origins in the upper by-four windows on the facade. The Merchants' Hall was built to complete the town square. A memorial inscription referring to the Captain of the People, Pino di Vernacci, gives us the exact date of construction, 1285. Antonio Allegri, called Correggio, is the artist whose contribution most characterizes the artistic impetus in Parma in the early 1500s. Correggio arrived in Parma to decorate the private quarters of the abbess of the convent of St. Paul. He transformed the architecture of the room, giving it an unusual open umbrella shape, which he frescoed as a pergola of bamboo poles, adorned with festoons of fruit and flowers. In the ovals open to the skies, you can see putti holding hunting trophies. On the chimney-piece is painted Diana, goddess of the hunt. We can identify in this figure the abbess of the convent who commissioned the work. The vault opens with monochrome lunettes figuring pagan myths and gods, an iconography which the Renaissance cult for the antique diffused throughout the Italian courts. To really understand the revolutionary nature of Correggio's work, it suffices to look at the neighbouring room, painted only 5 years earlier by Alessandro Araldi, with themes still firmly set in late Gothic culture. Correggio's success was such that he was commissioned by the Benedictine monks to modernize the decoration of the newly reconstructed Church of St. John the Evangelist. The artist painted scenes from the life of the Apostle John from his youth until the culmination of his existence, when he was transfigured by his vision of Christ and the apostles in celestial triumph. The suppleness of the bodies, the large and powerful moulding of the forms, brings to mind the paintings of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. Correggio also affrescoed the apse of this church, with the coronation of the Virgin Mary. A small part of this work is preserved in the National Gallery of Parma. Next to the church is the monastery with its cloisters. Here, in this hallowed atmosphere, can be found the monumental library. The Benedictines had it decorated by the Bolognese painters, Antonio Paganini and Ercole Pio, with scenes taken from the Bible of Philip II of Spain, which had been printed in Greek, Latin, Hebrew, and Syriac. These 4 languages can be seen in inscriptions on the vaulted ceiling. Another affresco depicts the victorious Christian fleet at the Battle of Lepanto, which finally halted the Ottoman advance to the west. The Duke of Parma, Alexander Farnese, took part in this battle. Maps of sacred places and intricate paintings of sacred vessels, like the altar prepared for a Jewish ritual, complete the affresco decorations of this library. However, we must return to the cathedral to find the maximum expression of Correggio's revolutionary, new approach to art. In the cupola, Correggio painted the Ascension of the Virgin Mary, anticipating by more than a century spatial solutions appropriate to the Baroque style. The artist has transformed the cupola into the open sky as broad as the heavens themselves, wherein the Virgin rises ever upwards, surrounded by angels illuminated by the light of paradise, while Christ, her Son, descends from on high to meet her. By using a very daring perspective, Correggio has created a spiral movement which draws the figures towards the infinity of God. In the pendentives, the artist has painted the patron saints of the city. In the central nave, Lattanzio Gambara and Bernardino Gatti have illustrated episodes from the life of Christ as a means of divulgating predominant religious themes. This affresco cycle concludes with the representation of the ascension of Christ into heaven on the contrafacade of the cathedral. Followers of Correggio were Giambattista Tinti, who painted the cupola of the church of Santa Maria degli Angeli, and Antonio Bernabei, who, in the church of Santa Maria del Quartiere, used the same motive of concentric movement that the master had used in the cathedral. The church of Santa Maria della Steccata was built to house a Marian image, which local people believed had miraculous properties. The wooden fence which gave the church its name protected the icon from the excesses of the faithful. In the arch over the presbytery, Francesco Mazzola, called Parmigianino, the second great artist working in Parma in the first half of the 16th century, created his vision of the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. A characteristic of Parmigianino which marks him out from Correggio is his obsession with detail. Manierism was now an established art form in Parma. This artist is also attributed with the organ door depicting Santa Cecilia, where one can see the characteristic twisted column motive enriched with incisions. The central cupola was affrescoed by Bernardino Gatti, who, while taking up the themes of Correggio, represented Christ and the heavenly host following a more traditional, less creative iconography. Within the ducal gardens, the small San Vitale Palazzetto was built. This is a significant example of a 16th century aristocratic house. It was a refined meeting place for courtiers and men of letters who congregated around the figure of Monsignor Eucherio San Vitale. The year 1545 saw a fundamental passage of power in the history of Parma, when, together with the city of Piacenza, it became the seat of an autonomous duchy under the Farnese family. Duke Ottavio Farnese immediately wanted to build a ducal palace to represent the power of the court. The Modenese architect Jacopo Barozzi, called Vignola, completed the building in 1561. Duke Ottavio's son Alexander, soldier and expert in military discipline, ordered construction of the citadel, built along the lines of the city of Antwerp, where he was governor. This impressive fortress was used as a barracks and a prison, and was immortalized by Stendhal. The citadel was joined to the town by the city walls. The presence of the Farnese family influenced the architecture of the city throughout the century. Ranuccio I, who succeeded Alexander, continued building work on the Pilotta Palace, which was conceived of as a service palace for the court. Inside it lived servants, soldiers, grooms and stable boys. The huge rooms became storerooms, archives, stables and haylofts. The name pilota would appear to come from the Basque game of pelota, which was played in the great courtyard where the church of St. Peter Martyr was situated. Napoleon's troops were to raze this church to the ground. The pilota was joined to the tower of the Rocchetta by means of a wooden bridge, and in this way the family had convenient access to the ducal palace. The architect Francesco Pacciotto was in charge of planning the pilota. Other architects were to modify and change the original project over time, and today the palace appears unfinished and disorganized. The internal stairway was designed by the court architect Simone Moschino. Covered by an octagonal cupola, through an impressive wooden doorway we now enter what was to become one of the largest European assembly rooms of the time. The Great Theatre. Of this, now called the Farnese Theatre, only the structure remains. It was in fact completely destroyed during the Second World War. During the 1950s, the wooden structure was rebuilt using the original drawings. At the time it was built, the wood and the columns were painted to look like marble. The niches and the balustrade were decorated with statues. Ranuccio I entrusted the project to Giovan Battista Aleotti, and it was finished after only 1 year. It was inaugurated on the wedding day of Odoardo Farnese and Margherita dei Medici, daughter of Cosimo, Signore of Florence. In front of nearly 5,000 people, the grandiose opera, Mercury and Mars, by Claudio Monteverdi, was presented. At a certain moment, the body of the theatre was flooded with water to allow the representation of a naval battle. After some years of closure, Ranuccio II, who succeeded Odoardo, reopened this magnificent space for performances and thus ensured European fame for the theatre. The painter Bartolomeo Schedoni worked for the Farnese court. His paintings of the Deposition of Christ and the Three Marys at the Sepulchre, commissioned for the Church of Fontevivo, are today preserved together with the Last Supper in the National Gallery. Influenced by the work of Correggio, the artist is noteworthy for the way he paints light, precise and cutting, illuminating the scene from one side only, showing his debt to Caravaggio as well. The town hall was erected for the marriage between Odoardo and Margherita in a building style similar to that of the Pilota Palace. The facade of the Palazzo del Podestà was redone at the same time. In total contrast to these austere palaces are the daring and unusual shapes and forms adopted for the bell tower of San Sepolcro by the architect Simone Moschino, who designed the facade of the Church of St. John the Evangelist in a pure Baroque style, which would later be enriched with statues of apostles and saints. Following the dictates of a style which required decoration in all its manifestations, the Church of Santa Maria della Steccata was also decorated with vases, festoons and statues by the artist and sculptor Mauro Oddi. A new twist was given to theatrical illusion in the work of the architect and scenographer Bibbiena, who brought an early example of the Rococo decorative style to Parma in the Church of St. Anthony Abbot, where he constructed a cut-out double ceiling which created the illusion of an open space in the heavens, where, above the clouds, sits God the Father and his angels. An expression of the late Baroque style is the majestic interior of the Church of St. Rocco, completely redone by the Bolognese Alfonso Torregiani. Dominating the alleyways and narrow streets of the area of town on the other side of the river, the Oltre Torrente, are the towers of the Paolotti, two tall bell towers which were once part of the Church of San Francesco di Paola, built later in the century and now deconsecrated. The Baroque facade of this church completed the perspective created in Via d'Azeglio by the lengthy structure of the Ospedale Vecchio, once a hospital of mercy and until 1926 the principal city hospital. Beneath the colonnade, in 1663, an oratory was built to honour the devotion of local people to the patron saint of the city, St. Hilary, Bishop of Poitiers. The three naves of the tiny church are decorated with carved columns and examples of the stucco work of Domenico Reti. The paintings by Giovanni Maria Conti represent saints and blessed people from the city. Frescoes of winged cherubs against a background of heaven decorate the ceiling and illuminate this refined chapel. The last representative of the Farnese dynasty was Antonio, who died without heirs. The Duchy of Parma and Piacenza passed to the House of Bourbon, relations of the Farnese through the marriage of Elisabetta, daughter of Duke Francesco Farnese, and Philip V of Spain. Their wedding, celebrated with great pomp in the cathedral, was painted by Ilario Spolverini in the painting which today hangs in the town hall. The Duchy of Parma and Piacenza was entrusted to their children, Don Carlo and Don Filippo. Don Filippo of Bourbon married Louise Elizabeth, daughter of Louis XV of France, and she brought with her from Paris artists, sculptors, and administrators. The architect Enémond Alexandre Petitot gave a completely new look to the city, having important city palaces painted with a particular tonality of yellow, which became known as Parma yellow. This colour is still used today in the city insignia. Thanks to him, the city was enriched with elegant architectural works. The facade of the Tribunal of the Appeals Court on the south side of the Pilota, the medieval facade of the Church of St. Peter was transformed, following the canons of the neoclassic style, which reworked ancient Roman and Greek temples. Ornamental motifs such as pillars and columns were used as a counterpoint to the overflowing Baroque style. Petitot designed the Altar to Friendship, which was placed in the main square as a reference point to measure distance from the centre of town to the milestones placed along the principal roads of the duchy. The Palazzo della Riserva, opposite the Pilota, was transformed from a court guest house to a casino or gaming rooms for aristocrats and courtesans. Based on Petitot's plans, the ducal park was changed, following French taste, with walkways and ornamental flower beds. Two new entrances were opened, one to the east at the Santa Croce Gate and another on the Strada Farnese. In front of the ducal palace, whose architectural structure was modified by Petitot, the French sculptor Jean-Baptiste Boudard, a professor at the Academy of Fine Arts, embellished the principal avenues with statues representing agricultural and mythological deities. Of particular interest is the Sileno group, with the shepherds Croni and Manasillo, and the nymph Egle, inspired by a verse from Virgil. On the facade of the governor's palace, a niche was made for Boudard's statue of the Virgin Mary. The central position given to her image was in honor of the devotion of the ordinary people of the city to the person of the Virgin Mary. A coat of arms from the 1200s has the motto, "Our enemies fear us because the Virgin protects Parma." Even today in the side streets and lanes, you can find votive shrines containing images of Our Lady, which bear witness to the sincerity of this popular manifestation of faith. The Petitot-designed casino was built to terminate the perspective of the wide, tree-lined avenue which skirted the city walls, and was a favorite place for a carriage ride. This was the first of many coffee houses which were to spring up in later years and become the fulcrum of the intellectual life of the city. Petitot also designed a definitive reorganization of the ducal residence, but his plans were never carried out. The Botanical School was founded, and both the facade of the building and the greenhouses were the work of Petitot. The description of the Athens of Italy which was used at this time bore witness to the cultural ferment which involved the whole city, and owed a debt as well to the activities of the Prime Minister Guglielmo Dutillot, who inaugurated in the Pilota Palace the Museum of Antiquities, with the first Roman remains found at the archaeological site at Velea. Dutillot also entrusted Father Paolo Emilio Paciaudi with founding the Ducal Library. The Ducal Press was established, and its fame grew thanks to the presence of Giambattista Bodoni, whose Bodonian typescript is still in use in the printing industry. At the death of Don Filippo, the cultural climate instilled by the Duke and his court came to an end. His son, Ferdinando, was less interested in the destiny of the duchy. After his marriage to Maria Amalia, daughter of Maria Teresa of Austria, the French were thrown out of the city, and with their departure, the golden age of Illuminism in Parma came to an end. Enémond Petitot left his mark on an epoch. His followers proposed neoclassical decorative elements which can still be seen in certain buildings. Palazzo Corrado Cervi, built by Domenico Cossetti. Palazzo San Vitale, whose facade was restored by Rasori. Palazzo del Grillo, now Palazzo Marchi. The end of the century saw invasion by the troops of Napoleon. Don Ferdinando did not oppose them and declared his neutrality. Daughter of the Habsburg Emperor, Empress of France following her marriage to Napoleon, Maria Luigia arrived with her court in Parma after the Congress of Vienna had assigned the duchy to her. The problem of a ducal residence was immediately apparent. The architect Nicola Bettoli designed a facade for the palace which we can only admire from time, as it was destroyed during the Second World War. The elegant interiors were recorded by the painter Naudin in a series of beautiful watercolors now in the Lombardi Museum. A cultured and knowledgeable patroness of the arts who had been brought up at the court of Vienna, the Duchess charged Bettoli with designing a theatre which would bring prestige to the city. The Theatre Royal was inaugurated in 1829 with Vincenzo Bellini's opera Zaira, in the presence of the Duchess, whose portrait Giambattista Borghese had painted as Minerva, goddess of wisdom, on the theatre curtain. A young Giuseppe Verdi, after a production of Nabucco in the theatre, dedicated his opera I Lombardi alla prima crociata to the Duchess. Nicola Bettoli, true creator of the architectural style of the time, designed the facade of the Maria Luigia College, where the two most important educational institutions in the city were brought together: the Nobles College for young aristocrats and the Lalata College, where education and instruction were available to people of humbler origin. Inside the college, the Giant's Room, frescoed by Lattanzio Gambara in the 16th century, took up a theme dear to the hearts of painters of the late Cinquecento, the Battle of Lepanto. In the room which would become a theatre, the curtain, painted by Girolamo Magnani, shows a maestro leading his pupils to the Temple of Fame. The sculptor Canova immortalized the Duchess, and the splendid statue was placed in the National Gallery. The gallery itself underwent major expansion thanks to Paolo Toschi and the donations of Maria Luigia. The Great Hall was restructured by Bettoli, who also designed the reading room in the Palatine Library. The citizens of Parma still venerate the memory of Maria Luigia, mostly because of the social reforms she carried out during her rule. The colonnades designed by Bettoli brought all the butchers of the city together under one roof. On the first floor there was a nursery school. The old hospital was enlarged and added to with a building for orphans run by the Sisters of Charity. To give ordinary people access to a place previously only available to the court, the Duchess ordered the gates of the Ducal Park to be opened. She also gave dignity to the idea of eternal repose with the building of the Villetta Cemetery. The Duchess guided the city and Duchy of Parma until her death in 1847. All the citizens accompanied the hearse to the city gates as their Duchess departed for Vienna and a regal burial. The Duchy of Parma returned to the Bourbon family in the person of Charles III, who was assassinated. His widow, Louisa Maria of Berry, governed in the name of her infant son. An example of an important social undertaking in the city is the Via della Salute, or Street of Good Health, where the houses were designed specifically to safeguard hygiene. A typical noble palace from this century is Palazzo Carmi, recently restored to its original splendor. Fluted pilaster strips topped by Ionic capitals support the gable. Elements of the neoclassical style are evident. During the 19th century, Palazzo Pigorini was lived in by two illustrious people, the poet Angelo Mazza and the explorer Vittorio Bottego. The building is today used for exhibitions organized by the local administration in Parma. The recent restoration has made the most of the frescoes by Francesco Scaramuzza. His most famous pupil, Cecrope Barilli, together with Girolamo Magnani, realized the decorations in the council chamber in the town hall. Towards the end of the century, Parma witnessed the birth of Arturo Toscanini. The house where he was born is now a museum with precious testimonials of the life of the great conductor. And it is with the voice of the maestro, conducting rehearsals of La Traviata, that we wish to leave our story.
Il tempo giusto, ram, plom, pam, ritmo, via. Lam, li, so, li, lai, lam, li, so, li, la, 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 li, lam, dan, ta, li, la, li, tam, li. Piano, trombone, trompetto, la, 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 pizzicato, la. Piano, e tu che senti? A terziare no, più piano, piano e così. You have the maggiore, e leggero, via. Oh. Look at me. Poco. Stringendo. Dove finì? Contrabbassi, follow me! E corte note! Short note! So, sembrano dei carri! Non so mica sto meglio. Oh, Madonna Santissima! Short note! Ancora un po'. In mezzo. Have you what's number? Yes. Beh. Sì,